So my name is Oliver Stormshack, and I'm the CEO and green coffee buyer for Olympia Coffee Roasting. Day to day varies a lot. Mostly, I deal with emergencies every day. The process of coffee roasting is really a chemical reaction. You have a raw ingredient that essentially is a seed. That seed is packed with proteins, carbohydrates inside of it. The key to unlocking all of that and pulling out flavor is careful roasting.
My name is Raina, and I work as the retail trainer at Olympia Coffee Roasting Company. The way that coffee is grown and the way that coffee is roasted can absolutely affect your otherwise perfect espresso, simply because it's made of coffee, which is a plant.
A few of the things that I'm looking for when I'm buying a coffee really start with the place of origin. We like more of what we'd call the heirloom coffee varietals. Older varietals have a little bit more elegance and sweetness, and typically a great coffee can only exist from altitude, so it has to be a high-grown coffee. The beginning stage for most roasters is to receive green coffee samples. When we receive a fresh green coffee into our warehouse, it's really a process of discovery. We have to learn everything we can about that individual ingredient. We do a selection process of green grading those coffees. Just like any other grain, you really want to make sure that the product is super stable and it's within a quality spectrum that we require. Where a coffee's from is really one of the equations to discovering a new roast profile. Then the next step is to look at processing. How that coffee was processed is going to really dramatically affect the overall flavor of the coffee. You have three basic families of processing: natural processed coffees, honey processed coffees, and washed coffees. And those three processes really impact the coffee flavor probably more than any other aspect to coffee. In the beginning, we start with a small roaster that we have, and we do test batches. And we try to gauge what an ideal roast profile will look like. We can usually nail a roast profile by the third roast. We then move it on to a larger production roasting machine, and that test process continues. We taste every single batch of coffee, roast every single day of the year. So we're constantly monitoring the quality of our coffee and perfecting the roast. Usually in the beginning of a roast, you have a drying phase. So you're just pushing out the moisture content that's within the bean. Typically within a coffee bean, there's 10% moisture, and the first few minutes is just releasing that moisture. Around 250 degrees is going to be a caramelization stage. And this is really pushing out and elongating the carbohydrates and the proteins within the coffee bean itself. As the coffee moves up in temperature to around 350 degrees, you move into a stage called Maillard reaction. And visually, that's where you get the brown color of a coffee bean. Also, during that same stage, coffee will come to a boil within the structure of the bean itself. So sometimes you'll hear terms like first crack or second crack. First crack is water in a coffee bean coming to a boil. Second crack is the oil within a coffee bean coming to a boil. The older days of specialty coffee, it was always defined that every coffee was roasted to at least second crack. Modern coffee is much lighter roasted. When you move towards and you enter or exit the second crack process, what's happening within the coffee bean is you're just building up more carbon. And carbon is just kind of to be blunt, burnt flavors. Some people love that flavor in a coffee, but with really, really high-end coffees, you're buying the best of the very best, and you're kind of erasing all of that good flavor. So that's one of the reasons that we don't go that dark with our coffees, is we want to preserve the taste of place within the coffee itself.
Solubility changes with roast. So when we talk about solubility in terms of making espresso, the more developed your coffee is, so darker, more roasty coffee, you're going to need less time extracting because the coffee is more soluble. Light roasted coffees, you're going to be taking a lot longer to pull your espresso with a bigger yield, so that you get all of the things that you want from that espresso. And this is where like the 1-to-3 ratio often comes in, and that really only works for light roasted coffees because you have to work so much harder. With a slightly darker roasted coffee, you might be at a 1-to-2, and with like a really deeply developed coffee, you're gonna maybe do a 1-to-1 ratio.
I think as a consumer, a couple of other key details is to look for a roast date. Look for something that's really fresh. I personally really love fresh roasted coffee. A lot of great coffee that's on the lighter spectrum can also still taste great a month out of the roaster. But I think purchasing coffee that's clearly dated on the bag is really key.
The further away you get from the roast date, the more espresso you'll see, but less crema. I find that the sweet spot for a good crema to espresso ratio is about 7 days with a medium roast coffee. You want to give your coffee time to stabilize. That way it's not producing massive bubbles of crema because there's a massive amount of carbon dioxide in there. Once you get kind of to like the 21 days off roast, that's when you start to see really diminished flat crema that doesn't add any flavor or body to your espresso. You want to be able to store your coffee in a place that is cool, dark, and airtight. I generally like to put my coffee in an airtight container about 7 days after roast. I think that freezing coffee has a place, and I think that freezing coffee is actually really effective when done properly. You're gonna actually be able to slow down the oxidation of your coffee, especially if you're working with coffee that's like a month and a half old. By freezing your coffee, you're actually able to get better particle distribution. So if you're looking for that really clear, articulate espresso, freezing your coffee, whether it's old or not, might be a really good option for you. This also kind of plays into roast profile. Anytime you have finer ground coffee, you are expediting extraction. The lighter your coffee, the more time you're gonna need to extract, the more fine you want your grind. The darker the coffee, you're gonna want slightly bigger particles, slightly faster moving water. When I taste a shot of espresso, what I'm really looking for is sweet, balanced, and complex.